to Reason podcast. I am your host, Robert Stanley. Today, I'm talking to the highly educated German theologian, Jerome Denis Andre, about whether personal experience is justification for the belief in the divine.
It's the Right to Reason podcast.
This episode of the Right to Reason podcast is brought to you by our patrons and contributors like me. We have all recognized the value of the unrestrained marketplace of ideas and have decided to make a difference. You can make a difference too. Contribute at patreon.com/right and learn more about your right to reason at therighttoreason.com. Your activism is appreciated.
Jerome Denis Andre. I hope I pronounced that correctly, sir.
Yes.
Fantastic. It's nice to talk to you. I think former guest of the show, Justin Caleb Graves, was on, I want to say like maybe a year ago. He was on in a bunch of episodes, and then you and I started talking on one of his threads, and I thought, what a fun conversation this might be. So you're a Christian, and you're currently a student of religious studies. Is that correct?
Yes, I study academic theology in Germany. I started to study it quite some years ago, and then paused for a while because I was in Hong Kong and instead studied pastoral counseling, where I got a Master of Arts, and now I'm back in Germany and finishing up my proper theological studies and going for MDiv.
Fantastic. So you know your stuff, basically.
Mostly it depends on the topic, but I think I do.
What made you believe in God in the first place? Was it you just grew up that way, or is it something that you kind of picked up in your adulthood?
That's an interesting question because I had one parent who was a Christian, my mother, but she for the most part is like, you could say a Christmas Christian, so she shows up in church on Christmas and the rest of the year not really. Mm-hmm. My father isn't a Christian. My father, I'd say the only thing he believes in is communism. He's in the German Communist Party, the DKP, on a regional level, a leader. And yeah, I mean, the marriage between my parents didn't work out, but for different reasons. So that had nothing to do with it. And so I always had a spectrum of ideas I was presented with, but somehow, as long as I can think back, I had belief into God. My belief certainly changed in how I viewed God over the years, but I can't explain why I did. It could be from the influence from my mother. It could be influenced by my kindergarten time, because I was in a Christian kindergarten, because that was the kindergarten where other family members were in, my cousins specifically. So that's why I was put into that, not into the city's kindergarten. So
are you a communist yourself?
I am socialist, but not in the way my father is, because my father is, a Stalinist. He believes into revolutionary communism. And one of the things I, aside of Christianity, believe in the most is pragmatical pacifism. So I'm not somebody who would say there's never a place for violence and self-defense, but I reject ideologies that say the only way to achieve a good world is violence. And the issue is my father's ideology is such an ideology. Like, one of the most heated discussions I regularly have with my dad is when the topic comes upon the children of the Tsar, which were, of course, killed, and when Yekaterinburg was attacked by the whites, so the supporters of the Tsar. And I say it was wrong to kill them because they were children. They had no reason.
Right.
Yeah, but my father says it was historically necessary, and I say no. Kind
of like, would you kill Hitler if he was, baby Hitler? Would you kill baby Hitler? You feel like consequentially it would be necessary.
I think that's a different question, because there you are speculating about time travel and all these questions. Why I specifically feel that in the situation of the Tsar's children, there would have been other ways. You could have tried to smuggle them out of the city and raise them differently.
Yeah, that's true.
You could have just tried to, I don't know. I feel there would have been potentially another way. And when there is another way, you shouldn't just kill people.
Yeah, I'm with you on that one. And, as far as socialism, I always felt like Jesus would lean a little more socialist today. Obviously, he wouldn't know what that is. back then, but he seems more of a socialist than a capitalist for sure.
Well, in economic questions, I agree. Of course, not in terms of what we understand a socialist to be today, because to be a socialist, socialism, as I understand it, is a response to capitalism because it wants to end the extraction of surplus value. And of course, in biblical times, there was no bourgeois capitalist state, and there were no companies in the modern sense that. I mean, there was surplus value extraction, but
not capitalism.
Yes.
Yeah. The folks here in America, like right-wing religious kind of people, they really don't like it whenever you point out that Jesus would probably have been a socialist today. That just pisses them off, because for them, they equate that whole Red Scare, McCarthyism kind of, anything socialist, anything communist is bad, and it's anti-God, because Jesus, would have been an American standing at the Mexican border stopping immigrants from coming in. Like their view of Christ is so far different from the rest of y'all, right?
I mean, it's not a common view over here either.
Right.
I mean, overall, we are more left-leaning in Germany, at least. I can't speak for other European countries, but not in the political realms I move in. Like my church, the Evangelical Lutheran Church of Bavaria, it's certainly in most of its ethical positions like slightly center-left, I'd say, but it's not socialist by any means. No.
I think a lot of our ideas on politics and communism and even Jesus, we're probably not that far apart, you and I. Like, you sound like my kind of dude, but when it comes to just the philosophical reasons for God's existence, whether or not we need him for morality, whether or not we could have this reality without a creator, could there be a creation without a creator, that kind of thing, that's probably where we would disagree. And I kind of wanted to talk to you about that a little bit. Why do you believe in God? What is you'd say, if this one thing fell apart, if you have one big thing, this would be such a quintessential part of the scaffolding of my concept of God. If this wasn't true, this one would kick my ass. Like this, man, my faith in God would at least be challenged, if not for this.
It's a really good question, but to be honest, I'm not sure whether such a central piece exists. Right. There certainly could be a central piece in the way like that I probably wouldn't be Christian anymore. But I feel like it would be really hard to get me off the idea of theism as a concept in itself, and I can explain to you why. Like, for example, if it's hard to imagine, but perhaps, for example, if the body of Christ was found, like the corpse, and it could be in some way, I wouldn't imagine how, but if it in some way could be proven that that really is the historical Jesus, then probably I would have a hard time staying Christian. But I feel like I still would be drawn to the idea of God, because my reason for God isn't a philosophical idea. It's not like you come to a conclusion, and if it's proven wrong, you go to a different conclusion. It's really more like a feeling or a relationship. That's, for example, why I struggled before to answer how I became a Christian, because it's just part of me as long as I can think. And that's a reason why I struggle a little bit with the idea of missionary work, and a lot of Christians push it, because I'm not sure it's possible to convince somebody with rational arguments that there is a God. At the same time, I really think that a lot of atheists as well have the wrong idea when they think they can convince Christians by not being Christian anymore with a rational argument. I really feel it comes down to experience. Like, if I would go into missionary work, I would tell people, come to church, see if you like it, see if you experience something, but I'd step away from arguments for the existence of God, because I don't think it's possible.
What's
I
weird?
think the best you can do there is kind of make an argument that it's not irrational to believe in God,
right?
But it's the best you can do.
Yeah, I would agree. That's probably the best you could get. I mean, I think I was convinced for rational reasons, but as far as experience goes, what's really bizarre for me is, I'll step back. So anytime my parents are in town, my dad was a preacher, and they like to go to church on Sunday, of course, fundamentalist, Baptist, independent Baptist. And anytime they're in town, the family and we all go to church together, right? I bring the kids. They hate it. I got 2 teenagers. They didn't really grow up with it. Maybe when they were really young we did, but by the time they were, little thinkers, they didn't get indoctrinated with that kind of thing. So church to them isn't appealing. But we'll go there, and it's amazing to me. I can still feel the same feelings that I felt back when I was a believer. I felt them during very deep moments of meditation. The very rare moments where you actually get maybe sometimes it feels like a millisecond, but maybe it's more than that. Maybe it's an actual couple seconds, but you get that moment of real peace where just nothing is happening in your brain. And it might take an hour to get just a second out of it. But in that second, sometimes I feel something very similar to what I would have described during prayer or an intense moment of worship, of actually spiritually being in the throne room with my Lord and Savior. You know what I mean? Feeling the overwhelming gratitude toward my Creator, and just how small I was and how beautiful and bright, just all inspiring my God is. I would feel that way as a believer, and I can still do it today. I know it's not there. You know what I mean? I can still feel that feeling, even though there's nothing I'm directing that feeling to, and there's no spiritual experience occurring. It's still an experience, but just without the belief or without the spiritual connection to a God. So I always wonder about that with you guys that say, I believe based on my personal experience. I respect your point of saying you're not going to get somebody to change their mind without them having some kind of experiential connection with what you're saying. That's fair, but man, do you guys ever, are you aware that everybody else is doing this too? I guess is the way I would say it to you. Everybody else is experiencing the same stuff you are. They just do it with a different God. You know what I mean? Or with no God.
To a degree, I get where you are at, but the issue is I don't. How to explain
do you think your experience is special?
No, that's not. But for me personally, when I decide my religion or what I want to follow or not religion, then it depends upon my feelings. That doesn't mean that the experiences from others are invalid, because they are valid. But for my personal path, of course, I will follow my experiences. And I feel to believe, for example, in Islam, I personally would need to experience this through, I would need to attend a Muslim prayer and then experience this religion as truth for myself, and not as an abstract truth, because I interestingly enough did this, but as the best or the truth that fits for me. And I so far didn't. I so far only did with Christianity, and so I stay a Christian.
Of course.
I agree that other people have such feelings. I've read upon, for example, what really impressed me was I read people who went into shamanistic rituals, and they are very comparable to what Christians and the charismatic scene describe. And I visited several times, I forgot how they call it, but like not a mosque, but a meeting hall of Sufi Muslims. The people who dance and go into ecstatic experiences as Muslims. And I actually partook in the dances that don't have specifically Muslim theology in them. For example, they have one dance where they only chant La ilaha illallah. So there is no God outside of God. And I can say that as a Christian. So in those dances that didn't contradict my faith, I partook. And I understand why they do it, because I had, perhaps not to the degree they have, but I get why it causes them to feel something. But I just feel it's not the way or the path for me.
Okay.
In fact, it's a good point, because only at this point I want to finish. This meeting perhaps explains it in another way really well, because I afterwards talked to the teacher of those Sufi Muslims in Nuremberg, Germany. And he said that when we look to our differences, he believes that that God is or the experience of God is like a mountain, and God himself, or the most closest truth that comes closest to truth, is like the mountaintop. And when you look at the mountain, there are different fireplaces around the mountains that follow different paths up towards the top. And when they are quite far away from God or from the top than those fireplaces, because the mountain is conically shaped. They are quite far apart. But when they get closer to the truth, you can see them being closer to each other, but they never quite reach because they are not there yet. And I think that reflects a lot how I feel, because personally I don't experience secular meditation or Islam as a truth, but I understand why people experience it for them as a truth.
Okay, but the very fact that, and by the way, the mountain analogy, that's beautiful. I really like that. But the fact that other people are having these experiences that don't believe in your God, doesn't that challenge experience being a fundamental reason for your faith?
No, and I see. I just came up with an analogy that I think explains why it doesn't. For example,
but I'm not even like very high up on that mountain with my meditation. I'm some cracker in Texas that does this every once in a while. I've been playing with it for last 10 years now, but I'm no way like a Buddhist monk that's going to be up high on that mountain. I'm not on like your level of Christianity, the amount of time you've invested in, you study it incessantly, right? You are at the top of that mountain compared to most other humans on this earth, right? You are like an imam level person, right?
I'm sure if I can claim that, because I think how the teacher of that group meant it was not meant as that necessarily study or knowledge brings you there, but personal experience with whatever your truth is. And perhaps I would defend my truth in that way, that I'd say, I'm not in a relationship at the moment, but I have been in the past. And that I experience love in a relationship doesn't mean that the love people experience in other relationships is invalid. But I'm just in love with the woman I'm with. I'm not. You get what I mean?
Yeah, but you believe other women exist. So like my point about the mountain, and you're a very humble man, but you are up there somewhere, okay? And I am like down at the bottom as far as my meditation practices, right? If we're going to compare, we're meeting at the top of this mountain because we're both having similar experiences. And I think that's because there is no mountain.
Oh, I see.
You know what I mean? Like there's no mountain. We're all just on the same plane together. And the spiritual level that you're basing a lot of your belief on, that you feel supports a lot of your belief, is so... it's cliche. You know what I mean? It's not unique. It's almost easy to attain. I almost feel bad for people that haven't had religious experiences in their life, because I feel like that's a part of humanity that they missed out on. Whereas I think a lot of us that have really been pushed, maybe in our childhood or what have you, to really, really get a spiritual connection, you have to, or you're going to go to hell, there's all that pressure on you. And maybe it's a little bit easier for us to tap into it than it might be for others, but it's still, it's not something to base your entire reality on. That, you know what I mean?
Depending on how you mean your words, I would have two thoughts towards that. The one possibility that you mainly want to focus on the existence part, there I would say, does it really matter that much to my experience whether God exists or not? Because, of course, I feel that God exists, but if in the end it turned out like I die and there is no God, then of course my experience will stop. I just won't be there anymore. But would my life have been better for me or more valuable if I lived without that faith? And I don't think so, because given that I experience happiness, I experience love, I experience to be held in that religion, I think in the end, if it turns out to be all bullshit, then it is that way. It doesn't fundamentally change the experiences I had before. For example, let's say there's a person and they have a grandfather that towards them is really, really nice. But towards other people, he really behaved horrible. He maybe was a murderer or a rapist or some other really horrible thing. And the other person never knows that their grandfather was this way. Like So in a way, the idea that they have of their grandfather never existed. It was a wrong idea. That person, in that way they experienced him, didn't exist. But in the end, when they never get to know this and happily die with the wrong idea of their grandfather, does their life fundamentally change? Or would it have been, well, in that case, you could argue it would have been better, because there, of course, it's a social context, because they probably would be in the danger to treating the victims of their grandfather wrong or something like that.
Maybe, but I get your point. I would agree. I would rather go through my life, maybe not having certain knowledge of things that it's not going to help me to know it. It's only going to hurt me. The wife and I have this conversation on a rare occasion, but it's always the same conclusion. But as far as the God thing goes, we'll say, maybe ignorance, not calling you ignorant by any means, but just the concept of ignorance is bliss might apply in a lot of scenarios. But I just wouldn't want to go through my life believing reality in a fundamentally incorrect way. I am glad I'm an atheist. We both agree. But anytime the topic of infidelity comes up, if we both will agree that if that's something you want to do, if you want to devalue me to that level of dishonesty, of just corrupt evil, or what have you, if that's really important to you, you got to go through it. Be good enough at the infidelity and the affair that I don't find out. Do me the honor of letting me go my life, completing this mission that we both are trying to do. We're both trying to keep this marriage, afloat. We're both trying to do the best we can for our children. We're both trying to have a nice home and a nice family life. We have an agenda here. If you step out, keep it to yourself. That's kind of how we approach. I would rather not know. Let's keep this mission moving. But with God, I lost a place to put my gratitude. I'll tell you that much, Andre. When I look at a beautiful sky, if you lose your faith, I can guarantee you that's one thing you'll lose, is whenever you look out at just the beauty of nature, and you really feel grateful, and you want to just say, my God, I'm so thankful that you created this and allowed me to experience this just beautiful aesthetic of your creation. And you got nowhere to put that. And that's sad. But other than that, it's pretty good on this side, man.
Yeah, I get it. Maybe two thoughts that arise here. The first one is, what you said shows me that it is not really what you meant. But when you said before that I base my whole reality on, I'm not sure I even base my whole reality on God, because of course, while it is a really important part of my life, I have other interests. I play tabletop role-playing games. I have political activism. There's a lot of stuff I like to do. I don't know, collecting mushrooms, going hiking, that have not little to do with God. Of course, God is always involved in the way like my partner would involve if I would have a partner at the moment, but not that everything is connected directly to God. And the second idea, it really strikes me quite interesting how you formulate that you wouldn't have want to live your life in a way that in the end you didn't adhere what you perceive it as truth. Because in that sense, I'd say that while not God, because obviously you don't believe in a God, in a sense, truth is something comparable to you, because you view it as your highest value. Or would I be wrong in saying that?
Yeah, I think that's close to fair. I think you're painting me with the right brush. I don't know that I would say truth is my highest value, but at least in this topic, like, I showed you an example of where like I'd rather not even know. But in terms of like belief in God's not a small thing.
Yeah.
It's everything.
Like it's a high value for you.
Yeah, it explains literally every single thing on like this ontological level, right? So to go my life believing that, like, that's not like even like believing in vampires or something, you know what I mean? It's like something that we would both find ridiculous to believe in. It would be like believing in what was that philosopher that thought that everything was made up of like little tiny things, but not necessarily like atoms, but he called them it's not moles.
Oh,
you remember what I'm talking about? Catching us both off guard here, but
I know what you mean, but I don't remember either. We have in German, we have this idiom, es liegt mir auf der Zunge. It's laying on my tongue.
Yes, yeah. If I hadn't asked you, you'd been able to say it right off the top of your head. If I had to put you on the spot, I can't think of it. But anyway, it would be
I think it was Leibniz, but I could be wrong there.
That sounds right. But yeah, but just the idea that like that fundamentally on a fundamental level, getting reality that wrong, and you know, oddly enough, he actually, as I'm sure you're aware, was pretty close to right, but just wrong in the sense of like that's not how it works. I would want to know. It. Yeah, I would say
I guess
truth is high value to me. Sure.
By the way, I looked it up. It was Leipzig. It's the Monaden in German. I would have to switch to the English version of Google now too. Two thoughts there. The first one is even with the general idea of the world in a secular way, I think this is unavoidable. We will be wrong in some way, all of us, because science evolves. Like, if you would have been a secular person in the time of Leibniz, you might have believed in Monaden, or whatever it's called in English, because scientists would have said so. And I'm not saying we shall go against science because I very much say that, for example, evolution theory is correct, because all evidence points towards it. But in some ways you will be wrong, and I will be wrong, because knowledge isn't a thing that stays the same. That's the first thought. The second thought, even with that disagreement on a fundamental ontological level, I still think that experience-wise, both can be a fulfilling way to live life. For example, have you seen? Might catch you off guard, but have you seen Full Metal Alchemist, the anime?
I'm familiar with it. I'm not like an anime fan myself. My son loves it.
In the last episode, the villain and several main characters, spoiler for everybody listening, they enter a portal of truth and are like in this world between worlds where they are confronted with the concept of truth itself or God, or the show doesn't really make it clear what it is. And behind them is their personal portal of truth that symbolizes their experiences with alchemy, which is like the system of magic in this world. And the interesting thing is when the main characters step in there, on the door behind them, there is a very intricate work on the door, the carvings, and it shows many different philosophical ideas that they hold to. But when the villain steps in there, because he lived his life very pragmatically with the sole goal to achieve power and knowledge and nothing else, the door is empty. There is nothing on it. And I think a similar concept could be reached between atheists and believers, where we say, well, we fundamentally disagree on this ontological fact, but we can acknowledge that when we both live our lives in a way that strives to self-actualization and actualization of our values, then we could, when we look at each of the doors, see valuable stuff on there. Like on my door, there maybe would be icons. There maybe would be symbols for the sacraments, because in my religion that is important for me. On your door, maybe there would be philosophical ideas, there would be scientific discussions, and we could both look at it and say, well, that's a nice stuff. In the same way, you as an atheist still could maybe look at a song that was written by Bach and say, oh, that's beautiful work, even though you fundamentally disagree with the message. Or the way I could look at the song Little Nas, or whatever this rapper's name is that he recently dropped, and can say, well, I have to disagree with the message, but it's a good song. It has a good beat. The art of the video, music video, is really well done.
When I was a believer, I was challenged, not necessarily by some kind of experience. I was challenged by evolution, because my faith was one of literal Genesis. So whenever I found out about evolution, I thought, oh boy, this really spoils that whole idea of the 6-day creation. You know, I was challenged by mainly Freud at the time. I was a young man, and I didn't understand that Freud had been mostly rejected. You know, his concepts of Oedipus and electric complexes were mostly rejected by modern science, but he still presented a concept to me of an unconscious or a subconscious, right? That guides us, that pushes us with the id and superego. And to me, I thought, man, how could God judge us for our actions if our behavior is not something or at least the motivations of our behavior, it comes from something we're not even aware of. And then the book of Job. Those were my big three. The way God treated Job was disgusting. There is nothing moral about his behavior. Even if he's almighty, might doesn't make right. In my concept of ethics, he just destroyed that man's life and the lives of others. We always talk about, oh, Job's kids got killed. We rarely talk about, well, God orchestrated the death of his kids, like the death of those individuals died for nothing. For what? For a challenge between God and Satan or whoever he was talking to? The whole thing it's just a horrible book in my opinion. But it was those big three. Do those three things offer any challenge to you at all? Or is that just maybe my own personal experience of those being the big ones for me?
That's we have to address them point by point. I can't give an answer to all of them in one.
Of course.
Maybe first evolution. That's the most easiest one because it doesn't pose a challenge. I think evolution is correct, or at least in the sense that all evidence points toward it. So until there's better evidence, we should accept that most likely evolution happened in the way science describes it. There are some. I see how evolution could challenge a very biblicist, literalist faith in the way these terms are understood, for example, by conservative evangelicals, because you, for example, then need a way to explain why God allowed death or used death for the creation of humans, because usually the conception of evangelical Christianity is that death entered the world through the fall. And of course, if you don't have a literal fall anymore, that might be a problem.
And the whole basis of Christ, because Christ had to die for the sin of mankind that started when Adam ate the fruit. So, I mean, for evangelicals, it's not just explaining how everything got here. It's also a fundamental part of our reasons for being Christians.
Yeah, I see why. Personally, I don't have this issue because by now, at least, I view creation as an allegory, because you have a story in which you have a character named Ha-Adam, which in Hebrew is just a word for human or man, and his companion is Eve. In Hebrew, she's not Eve, she's Chava, which comes from the word of life. And so you have a story in which human or humanity is tempted by a symbol for eternal knowledge or eternal life. The snake is a symbol in many religions of the time and cultures of the time for a character that either guards knowledge or has to do with knowledge and with the strive for eternal life, and is aided by or is using life to achieve this. And in the end, human or humanity is cursed to work ha-adama, the earth. Adama is the Hebrew word for earth or ground. And the man Adam is cursed to work Adama, so it clearly there's a connection. And Chava, life, is forced to bring forth new Chava, life. So to me, that really it's clearly an allegory. I forgot who said it. I would have to look it up. Might have been E.P. Sanders, but I'm not sure. There was one theologian who said that we often nowadays say as liberal theologians that the people of the past, they told these literal stories, were dumb enough to believe them, and now we are clever enough to read them allegorically. But he says, no, it's the opposite way. The people of the past told these allegorical stories to explain reality, and some of us nowadays are failing in reading them literally. So that would be my answer for evolution. Interestingly enough, evolution had a lot to do with me studying theology, because when I was like 15, I had a phase where I was really, really conservative in a lot of my takes, like a evangelical phase. But one thing I never could accept was a short-term creationism, because the proof that the world is old is it's so undeniable strong that I could never buy into that.
Right.
And my youth group leader, when I told him that, when there was like a group lesson on creation, he said that I'd be I forgot how exactly he formulated it, but that I'm sent by Satan or influenced by Satan or something like that. And one of the reasons that I studied theology is because then in consequence, I bought theological books to have arguments against him. And I learned that I like to work with theological ideas. So that on evolution. Then the second point wasn't Job. It
was on the morality of the concept of sin itself, of judging humanity.
I see.
My first introduction to it, like I said, was
because of Freud. I remember.
Was because of Freud, yes. But it also goes into so much more. The way you were raised, your genes themselves. I mean, so much plays into the choices that we make. That to punitively judge mankind based on their behavior as their creator, the whole concept seems wrong. It seems cruel.
Oh yeah. I see. Let's put that off maybe as the last point, because I think it leads the furthest. Okay. So let's first address Job. I get your take on Job when you read the book like it's presented today. Like if Satan and God made a bet, and the bet was just to see who is correct, whether Job will fall away or not. That's kind of cruel. And the ending doesn't make up for it, because of course given new daughters is nice, but it doesn't make up for losing your old daughters. They are still dead. You will still grieve for them. But that the current form of the book of Job is not how it originally was. It's a book that is, to my knowledge, one of those that evolved the most over the centuries. And there are very contradictory theological ideas in it, and you really can see how theology evolved over time. Because initially, as far as I know, the book of Job was just the story of how can we formulate it, as a just suffering. So somebody who stays just and suffering. So to my knowledge, the original story was there is this character Job, and he is afflicted by a lot of illness and other unfortunes, and he says, God has given it to me, God has taken it from me, blessed is the Lord. And in the end, he is rewarded by God for being faithful. So it's just a story that says to us, hey, when you suffer, still stay with God. So that's all. And over the time, a lot of the other characters were added, like the friends of Job. What they say is that his illnesses are a result of sin. Both his wife and his friends say that they say you have to have some unrecognized sin, and why you suffer is because of that. A theological idea we still find in, for example, what is it called in English? The prosperity gospel churches. They say when you believe, then you will be healed, and if you don't believe, then then you are not healed, and hence, if you are not healed, it's your fault. Basically,
name it and claim it. That's how we say it over here.
oh.
It's that bad. Just hearing that made you go, oh, jeez.
In the end, however, in the current narrative, the friends are called wrong. In the end, God says, my servant Job has spoken right of me, not you. But it's not really clear if that always has been the case. Their friends and wife might have been added. At least they heard that hypothesis was that they present a different theological idea, because for a long time in the Old Testament there was this idea. This term now I have to say it in German because there isn't an English term. I've looked it up in the past. It's tun ergehens Zusammenhang. It's a terminus technicus in academic theology, and it basically means that what you do causes what happens to you. And for long,
would you say it's similar to karma?
Yes. And for a long time, that has been an idea in several texts of the Old Testament, but later texts of the Old Testament rejected it again. And so that isn't correct. And in the end, the narrative that surrounds Job was added, with God and Satan debating. I've heard both people argue it's an early narrative. I heard both people argue it's a late narrative. But what is really clear is that it was added to the Job story very, very late.
So you would agree with the modern version that represents a despicable, immoral deity, at least.
At least that when we understand Satan under the Christian concept, then or the majority Christian concept, then it's quite evil. Yes. I'd say it's a little bit more complicated with the idea of Satan initially within antique Judaism, because Hasatan is he isn't like an opponent of God. It's more somebody who. I have to say it doesn't change your point. It just changes the story, because in the original story, likely it wasn't that bad. It was Satan doing his job within the divine court. But yeah, it doesn't change the point that God kind of unnecessarily inflicted this suffering on him. So yes, I would agree that is quite challenging to explain. But at the end, my hermeneutics is that the Bible wasn't dictated by God. So it's not that much an issue to me.
I see.
I'd say there are still valuable ideas in it, but I'd agree with your point that in its final version, the book of Job can be quite a harmful book in some ways.
Fair enough. And then the final one, just the concept of God judging us for things that I don't know that we're necessarily responsible for. If anything, I would think, and to some degree, I'm sure you would agree, he's responsible for a lot of the things that we get judged for.
Oh, this is... I really have to think about how I answer this, because it leads into a lot of both philosophical and theological very big debates that I'm sure we can't answer sufficiently here.
Yeah, we got to wrap it up. We're coming up on that 1 hour mark where everybody clicks off. I don't know why. I listen to stuff for as long as I'm doing an activity, but a typical listener, they listen to something for about an hour, and maybe that's a lunch break or a long commute. Yeah. I haven't really figured that demographic out yet.
I understand. Well, then just let's kind of strive or that's not an English word. kind of touch things.
Yeah, I'll let you finish with this and have the last word on it, and just whatever concise way you'd want to say it. But I won't give you too much pushback.
Yeah, not necessarily. I think it was a nice debate, but maybe
I've enjoyed talking to you
out at some point.
Yeah.
So how I would answer this is, it kind of is. At first, the question is, do we have free will? And I don't know. There are Christian traditions that say we have, and there are Christian traditions that say we don't have, and there's in between. They're the Lutheran and the Calvinist tradition, and officially I'm part of the Lutheran tradition, like by church membership, would say we don't have free will, which of course makes it quite hard to say humanity is responsible for anything. There are the radical evangelicals who will say, no, we have absolute free will, which basically would say we are responsible for our own actions. And there is the in-between, where people say, well, we are influenced by sin as a metaphysical reality, or we are influenced by our upbringing, but we still can choose. And I think I'm more in that camp, at least by tendency. I really think that there is, of course, sociological a lot of stuff that influences us. A poor person is very underprivileged towards somebody that comes from a rich family. That's undeniable. Somebody who grows up in an environment of crime is more likely to do crime, etc. But there as well as an element, in my opinion, that we can choose. For example, in secular terms, there often is as an argument against free will brought up that if you, for example, decide to grab a mug, on my table there's a mug, and I decide to grab it, then the command for my hand to grab the mug is already measurable, apparently, before I even consciously think of this. But the thing is, I can stop myself from doing it. Like when I notice my hand going towards the mug, I want to drink again, I can consciously think, no, I don't want to do this, and then I won't. And in the same way, I'd argue there's a lot of stuff that...
Mark is German for cup?
No, Mark, I thought, is Mark the wrong English word? Tasse wäre German. It would be German.
Mug?
Mug, yeah.
Okay, I'm with you.
Sorry.
No, not at all. I've enjoyed listening to your accent.
so I can stop myself from doing that. And I think so in general we have a ability to choose that is obfuscated a little bit by our past, by our by sin, by our upbringing, by outside influences. But it doesn't change that we have, to a degree, responsibility. And now the second question is it okay that God judges us for that? That almost would need a second debate, because that would lead into so many different areas. First of all, it leads into the area, does God judge us in the way traditional Christianity says? So what even does traditional Christianity say? Because I'd say that the idea that God just will send everybody to hell for the slightest sin, that wasn't always an idea of Christianity. It sometimes was, it wasn't always, and even then it runs contrary to the ideas Judaism had about afterlife, which usually is that there are different types of afterlife, and even the worst version of it that you can get, Gehenna, it's not eternal. And as I understand, I mean, I'm not Jewish, so I could be wrong there, but as I understand it, it can only last up to a year, and then you get out or get destroyed or whatever, which is why the ritualistic grieving is only done for a year. So that would be the first question. Does really God punish us in that way? And then secondly, we would have to ask, is God the one that himself does the punishment, or is it something we inflict on ourselves? I sometimes heard the idea that hell might be closed from the inside, or that hell and heaven even might be the same thing. There's one philosopher who said that the fire of hell and the fire of the love of God are the very same thing, just I experience it as love. And because you dislike God, you dislike his presence. If you are like somebody, like an anti-theist, not an atheist, but an anti-theist would dislike God. So he wouldn't like to be in his presence, and that could be like punishment enough. And then there are different ideas of active punishment of God. It could be, like the radical conservatives say, that God really wants to see people burned, that he predestined some to be outside of justification. But it as well could be understood as a restorative idea of justice that makes us right again, that makes us full, that unfolds us from within the things in our heart that are hurt, that are traumatized, or the trauma we inflicted upon others. So I really can't answer it in this short time, because I can really understand why it drove you away from the idea of God, because quite frankly, if the only possible idea of afterlife I had ever been presented with was God burning people just because he wants to burn them, like tulip Calvinism sometimes teaches, yeah, that probably could have challenged my faith quite a bit as well. But I don't think that is the only answer we can give from a Christian perspective. I really don't.
Jerome Denis Andre, thank you so much. It's been a delightful conversation. I've enjoyed it very much, and we must do this again sometime, my friend.
Then thanks for the invitation, and have a nice evening. Oh, it's not evening in your place. Have a nice day.
I'll do my best. Thank you to Jerome. Thank you to Dave Blair at DaveBlairMusic.com. Thank you to Feedspot.com for promoting the Right to Reason to the Top 10 Atheist Podcast. Thank you to our patrons: Jason Parker, Freethinker 215, Alan Marks, Philip Spawn, Bernard Lamberell, Enema Man, Larry Wilson, and our top supporter, Rob Montgomery. You can support this broadcast at patreon.com/right and learn more at therighttoreason.com. Next week, we're going to hear a debate on evolution versus creationism. Between now and then, remember that you have the right to reason.